Are humans made to eat meat and root vegetables are the backup food? Or are humans made to eat root vegetables and meat is the backup food? Hello everyone, I'm Thomas Anton, and today I'm going to talk about what humans are supposed to eat and what our backup food is. And I think this is really important actually, because if we figure out what we're supposed to eat, what we're made to eat, then we figure out how to get everyone healthy. I'm actually really optimistic about this because I think now finally we're starting to see an answer to how to get people healthy, what we're made to eat, and if we do that, then rates of all these diseases will go down. Heart disease will go down, diabetes, obesity, cancer. All these diseases will start to decrease in their likelihood. They might even start to go away almost completely if we figure out what humans are made to eat and what our backup food is. Because right now, I think we have it kind of messed up. So, throughout evolutionary history, I really think there are only two options for what our main food would have been. I don't see like raw leaves and fruits and things like that other apes eat. I don't see that as an option for humans with our current caloric needs. Milk wasn't an option. I don't think grains were an option for most of the time. Beans weren't, I don't think, would have been a viable option for most of the time either. Really, I think there are only two viable options for what humans were made to eat and then for their backup food. And those are root vegetables and meat. I personally think that root vegetables make a lot more sense because there are actually several physiological adaptations that humans have that only make sense in the context of eating a diet centered around root vegetables. For one, we have a lot of starch digesting enzyme in our mouths, salivary amylase, and the genetic mutation that caused that starch digesting enzyme just happens to coincide. It happens to be 800,000 years old, which coincides with our best evidence for when we were starting to regularly use fire, and it also coincides with a large increase in brain size in human evolution. And for us to have a genetic mutation for extra starch digesting enzyme in our mouths when most carnivores don't have any, lions don't have any starch digesting enzyme in their mouths, for us to have that mutation stick around for 800,000 years probably means that it provided some benefit. And I think that benefit is that we ate a lot of root vegetables. I think it only makes sense if you say we ate a lot of starchy root vegetables, and we got the ability to digest, especially cooked starch, at the same time that we were regularly using fire, and then it led to an increase in brain size. I think that makes sense. That makes sense to say, okay, well, root vegetables could have caused that to happen. Centering our diet around meat would not have caused that to happen. So I think an adaptation that makes sense for root vegetables, that we would center our diet around root vegetables, is our salivary amylase starch digesting enzymes in our mouths. Another adaptation that I think only makes sense on a diet centered around root vegetables is if you look at our gut bacteria. When a baby is born, they actually are colonized with one specific group of gut bacteria called bifidobacteria. They're colonized redundantly. The baby gets it from the mother's vaginal tract, gastrointestinal tract, and from the breast milk itself. And then human breast milk is the most bifidogenic food basically on the planet, meaning that it feeds bifidobacteria, that specific type of gut bacteria, better than just about any other food on the planet, to the point that healthy babies have like 90% of their gut filled up with this one group of human-specific bifidobacteria. And what does that human-specific bifidobacteria eat? Well, it eats starch, it eats inulin, and it eats lactic acid bacteria. Those are the calories, fiber, and bacteria that you would expect to be found in freshly foraged root vegetables. Those are all abundant in root vegetables. So the fact that we colonize this one group of bacteria redundantly and then we feed it preferentially with human breast milk, and this is the healthiest time in a human's life for their, as far as their gut health is concerned. And then that gut bacteria eats all of the things in root vegetables. I think that only makes sense if humans ate a diet centered around root vegetables. I don't think it makes sense if they ate a diet centered around meat. I don't think it makes sense if they ate a diet where they were just kind of eating everything in equal amounts. I think it only makes sense if we centered our diets around root vegetables. And the other thing is, in our kidneys, we're able to filter out huge loads of potassium each and every day, over 10,000 milligrams of potassium. Most people can't get the 3,500 milligrams of 3,500 milligrams of potassium that they're supposed to get each day, which is lower than it was just a few years ago. Most people can't get even that amount on diets centered around grains or meat or processed food. The only diet where you could really easily get that much potassium every single day is a diet where you're eating root vegetables, where you're centering your diet around root vegetables, because root vegetables are incredible sources of potassium. Everyone knows potassium. They think of bananas first, but bananas are a really mediocre source of potassium. If you want some potassium, you eat a potato. You eat sweet potatoes. You eat a diet centered around root vegetables, you'll get tons and tons of potassium. And your kidneys can filter out tons and tons of potassium, which I think only makes sense if you assume that we ate a diet centered around root vegetables. Okay, so the salivary amylase in our mouths, gut bacteria that we have, our kidneys' ability to filter out potassium, I think all only makes sense if our diet was centered around root vegetables. What about if our diet was centered around meat? What about things like our strong stomach acid? I don't think that only makes sense in the context of a diet centered around meat. I think that would also make sense with a diet centered around root vegetables, because root vegetables are grown underground. The bacterial load under the ground is higher than above ground, so vegetables grown underground would have more bacteria on them than vegetables above ground. So eating a diet full of root vegetables, you would also want strong stomach acid. What about our canines? This one to me seems like kind of a joke. Like, people will say, oh, well, we have these canines, but they're really short and pathetic. I actually have sharper than average canines, and I can tell you it's more of a nuisance than anything. I'll cut my own lips with them. Like, it doesn't, I don't think I could like bite into a cow or something useful with them. Our ability to throw, some people say, oh, well, that only makes sense in order to hunt animals. I don't think that makes sense either. I think our ability to throw is more in line with an ability to defend ourselves than to hunt. I'm not saying people haven't hunted by throwing things, but I think it makes more sense to say that, hey, since 98% of the people would throw well enough in order to defend themselves from animals, and maybe 2% of people can throw well enough to actually hunt something, can only 2% of lions chase down antelopes and catch them? No. Like, 98% of them can. And the ones that don't, they don't survive. 98% of humans can throw well enough to defend ourselves from, at least to some extent, from scary animals. So I think our ability to throw is more based on defense rather than offense. Same thing for our ability to run long distances. I don't think that makes sense to say, well, we were persistence hunting and that's why we can run long distances. Because even in the book Born to Run, they talk about, well, like 4 of the people in that book, like they ran long distances like you might need to on a persistence hunt, and 4 of those people that they talk about were just about on the brink of death with dehydration. I don't think it makes sense. How many edible plants and sources of water are you going to just pass in order to keep up with an antelope that you may or may not catch? I don't think it makes sense. I think it makes more sense to say that we have an ability to run long distances because we were relatively nomadic and we were weak, so we needed to be able to travel long distances in the heat of the day in order to get to a new safe environment. I don't think it had anything to do with tracking down meat. Our big brains, like in theory, our big brains would have been useful on lots of diets, not just on a diet centered around meat. Our ability to talk, same thing, would have been useful for any animal that had to tell stories about, hey, we're going here today, a really long ways away. especially if they split the group, they had some people go to one place and other people go to another place. They need to be able to talk, to communicate. People who could talk better would have been more likely to find each other again and survive. People who can talk better would have been more likely to be able to tell each other how to process foods safely in order to maximize calories. Talking would not have just have been useful for meat or like hunting strategy. Talking would have been useful for lots of things. Tool making would have been useful for any kind of diet. If you cut your food into smaller pieces, you get more calories from it. It's easier to digest. Not just if it's meat, if it's any food at all. Same thing with fire. I think fire actually makes the most sense for root vegetables. But theoretically, you would get some benefit from having the ability to create fire or harness fire on any sort of diet. So I don't think that we have any physiological adaptations or any cultural adaptations, any skills that we possess that only make sense on a diet centered around meat. But we have a few adaptations that only make sense on a diet centered around root vegetables. To me, this means that our diets should be centered around root vegetables and that meat was the backup food. Okay? I think meat was the backup food, root vegetables were the center of the diet, and as further evidence of this, the longest lived, healthiest population in recorded history were the Okinawans, an island in Japan, where they ate 2/3 of their diet from sweet potatoes, orange and purple sweet potatoes, which are root vegetables. The rest of their diet was made up of a little bit of grains, a little bit of beans, a little bit of other vegetables, and about 1 or 2% of their diet came from animal foods. But this is the healthiest population in recorded history, and they were eating orange and purple sweet potatoes for 2/3 of their calories. Unfortunately, they lost a lot of those benefits. They've gone away from that diet. They've westernized their diet. They're less healthy than they once were. But, importantly, like I said, I'm hopeful because they can get it back. They can have it back. We can all have it back. We can all have that level of health if we recognize that we're made to eat root vegetables, a diet centered around root vegetables, not just root vegetables. And I'm not necessarily advocating that you can't ever eat meat. For people who want to, you can find a way to do it healthily. But our diets should be centered around root vegetables. That's what we have adaptations for. That's what I think makes the most sense to say that we did throughout evolutionary history. And I think that's the way forward to finally lower these rates of disease, which are absolutely out of control. People are sick. People are going financially bankrupt from it. We need to get this under control, and I think this is the way forward, because understanding what we're made to eat should only lead to better health. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I try to respond to every question and comment that I can. If you like the video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you in a future video. Thank you for watching, and always remember to eat your root vegetables. Thank you.